This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, the 10 Commandments of Direct Media Sales. Now, this is sort of a follow-up episode from the 7 Deadly Sins of Agency Sales, which is a podcast that we covered in a much earlier season. Now, I've personally worked in both agency and direct sales. I run a sales team that has people in both as well. I can confidently say that direct and agency are both very unique sales disciplines, both of which require a very particular and very nuanced approach. Direct sales can actually be one of the most rewarding and one of the most exciting areas to work in media. However, if you fail to follow the basic commandments, it can quite literally be hell. You can probably see what I did there with the biblical reference. Now, I guess today is Tony Prentice. Tony is the joint COO/CRO of Mamamia. He is effectively running one of Australia's leading digital publishers on the commercial side. And Tony's worked in consulting. He's worked in many senior business leadership roles in the media sector. So he is a great guest to have on today to cover this topic. I'm going to hit you with a lot of spam. I always do. If you find me annoying on this podcast, you're going to really find me annoying on LinkedIn, which is where you need to connect with me to give me topic ideas for the show, to suggest people who should talk on the show, to ask if you'd like to be a guest on the show, and just generally to kind of interact with what we're trying to do here. So the link is in the show notes, or look for Jamie Wood on LinkedIn. And if anyone from LinkedIn is listening, I'm still waiting for that LinkedIn hoodie that apparently I'm going to get sent at some point soon. So looking forward to that as well. It's going to be a great episode. Looking forward to getting into it right now.
The first 5.
Tony, welcome.
Jamie, welcome to you too. Good to be here.
Good to be here on a Friday night. I appreciate the commitment to the cause, mate. I know the world of Mamamia is very busy, wrapping up a great first half of the financial year. Look, before we dive in, mate, give us a bit of an overview of your current 2 roles at Mamamia, because you've got a joint role there, and maybe a bit of background on your experience in media too.
No problem. Well, my Mamamia journey sort of started off in this split role piece, which now I've been there 4 years this month, actually. I've now got the pleasure of leading the revenue team as my main occupation. So we've been busy diversifying the revenue streams, growing the team and building out our coverage across the country. And that is what's keeping me busy at Mamamia. Previous to that, I've kind of become a bit of a digital specialist, but previously I've also done a decade in outdoor. I've done a tour of duty in radio, and between Mamamia and my last digital gig at News Corp, I also ran my own consulting business, spending a lot of time in sales organisations with salespeople, sales managers, and sales leaders. So hopefully I've got something to offer you on today's podcast.
Well, I think that's where you and I met, actually. You were on a consulting assignment with a previous company I was with, mate. So
yeah,
I definitely a very, very vast and broad background, which is a good one to set up today because we're talking about the 10 Commandments of Direct Media Sales. Now, to set this up, you've obviously guided the careers of direct media sales professionals over many years. I personally don't know if there's any job in media that's maybe a little more misunderstood from the outside than direct media sales. Is that something you might agree with?
Yeah, I think there's a funny kind of word association when you say direct sales that triggers a response for people, which is probably a little bit unjust. So I don't know, look, maybe for the purposes of it, it's probably better to reframe it a little bit around the fact that this genre of sales within media is the part of the game where you actually get to spend the most time dealing direct with clients. And that's probably where the direct word needs to be re-explained to people. So that's where it's unique and different, is that essentially 100% of your customer-facing time is in front of probably the decision maker.
It's a really good call. I mean, I started my career in direct media sales, and I think optically from the inside of an organization, they can actually see, perception can be reality. These people are always out, they're away from their desk. They don't seem to necessarily be working at any frenetic sort of pace, maybe the way an agency sales team is. And then when you're actually in the direct sales chair, you have a whole different perspective of what the role actually is, the level of commercial pressure that comes with it, the level of client expectations, the dips in motivation. So it's a topic I was really keen to get into, but I wanted to kind of take a bit of a fresh spin to it here. And so what we have in front of us is the 10 commandments, if you will, of direct media sales. And I thought what I could do is let's go through them one by one, and then let's maybe sort of unpack each and just kind of have a little bit of a conversation around why this might be one of the commandments if you want to really forge your career in direct media sales.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Media sales mastery.
Number 1, thou shalt always prospect for new business. What do we think about that one?
Yeah, well, we're doing it first, but I don't know whether it's ranked number 1. So let's tackle it, on its merits. There is a feeling that if you're in direct sales, that you're in the business of new business, but I also think it's probably only half the story. So maybe the reframe on that is more about that you're going to have to be better at understanding the life cycle of your customers, and you're going to have to be pretty good at strategic sales with understanding segmentation at the center of that. Because if you can't understand where to invest your time and who to invest it with, things can unravel for you. I think we've all been in teams where people have got a single large client. They devote, the majority of their hours Monday to Friday with that single bit of client, and then one day the relationship changes, clients disappear, musical chairs happen, and you don't have next quarter, next month, or next year line of sight. So to me, I feel like there is something about perpetual motion with direct sales and always looking to build out your customer base. But I feel like it's a bit more about segmenting and understanding where to put the time and effort in terms of new business. It's not just I'm always in the business of new business, because you never build a client base, right? If you don't stop and actually move people up and get the second, third, and fourth booking, then I don't think you last. I mean, and we've also seen people who start in direct sales in a blaze of glory and are not there in 9 months or a year.
I think always prospecting for new business is a little pointed at maybe the business managers who build a portfolio, seem to have a good customer base, spend a lot of time in account management mode, and to your great point, one or two kind of key clients may fall over, they may be sold, they may go to an agency, they may go out of business, as businesses do. And maybe the other reframe is, I think you maybe touched on it, new business is also potentially a bit of a catch-all for just good account list management and organic growth of existing clients. So finding new revenue opportunities or new, opportunities to expand a share of wallet, or spend across other products that you might have in your portfolio as well with an existing client. That's still really a form of new business in a way.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting. It depends on what sector you're actually selling in as well. The hyper-competitive sectors, if we can call that maybe radio, outdoor, where there's an abundance of competitors with similar offers, tend to train and teach the segmentation bit around strategic selling more so than others. So I think there is, as people chart and navigate their career journey, finding places during an interview process that actually have frameworks, have sales processes and models in place that enable you to build your business. I reckon it's one of those key interview questions. But, it's hard if you're starting out and don't know that. But I feel like, 20 years ago, there was more investment in actually teaching people how to build portfolios than there is today.
I couldn't agree more. On to number 2, honour thy internal departments. So obviously what this means is really building a level of political capital, building relationships, rapport with your internal sales support and your internal stakeholders. Why would this one be one of the 10 in your opinion?
Yeah, look, my reframe on it is, a simple mantra that I think it works in any media sales role, is that basically everyone is a client. And if you can orientate your thinking and behavior around your internal stakeholders being as important as your external stakeholders, gee, life gets better fast. If you can treat everyone like a client, then you get what you need, be it inventory, pricing outcomes, promotional support, whatever it might be, everything becomes a little more friction free for you. So, and then as you go further through your career, the other thing that I've done a lot of work with managers becoming execs is this notion of, particularly in a matrix organization that doesn't have really clear solid line reportings, is if you come up through the ranks through your direct sales career understanding that everyone's a client, it helps you a lot with that, a really high level skill around building coalitions and partnerships inside and across your own business. And that's the way you win. Because if you're an outlier who's treats the inside badly while you're focusing on all your clients' needs, and you become the role, your role becomes the spokesperson for your clients' needs only, you don't win at the end of the day. You actually have to balance the business's needs with the client's needs and all the stakeholders on both sides of the fence. So you see it a lot. It's a really common behavior, and you'll hear it in sales meetings. My client just wants to do this. And then everybody in the marketing department's rolling their eyes, or the people in the traffic department are going, you just don't get it. And it's a fairly common behaviour.
It really is. What do you think it is a byproduct of, mate? Do you think it's that there's just a lot of market pressure? Is it just not having a level of kind of business acumen? Like, what are some of the, if somebody's listening to the podcast right now going, well, these people are there to help support me and they should be focusing on the client, and we are in a revenue business, what might you say to some of those media salespeople around that particular attitude?
Look, I very rarely worked in teams or consulted to business with teams that have functions who overtly work against the revenue cause. It just doesn't happen, right? The reason that an individual might feel isolated or unsupported normally gets back to their own behaviours and their own style that they're conducting business on the inside of their business, and that's the problem. It's a coaching issue, and if you're lucky, if you're in a sales seat, you've got a good or great manager who will coach that into you. If not, you will probably bounce out of the business, potentially very successful on the revenue scoreboard, but leaving behind very mixed reviews from the cohort of people that you used to work with. Now, that doesn't help you in your next job, I can assure you, because one of the things that all the businesses have got a lot better at is the interview and sort of reference backgrounding of people to make sure that they're hiring correctly. So the diligence that's going on your next job might catch you out if you don't get, this right in your current job.
Number 3, remember the forecast and keep it holy.
Yeah, I call this one mind the gap.
Yeah.
Mind the gap, because you don't want to fall in, right? And it's interesting, given the pressure on revenue, and most organizations will run. Look, I'm not sure there's that many daily revenue meetings that are taking place. I think 10, 15, certainly 20 years ago, there were daily revenue forums, and there will be times when the company's under pressure and a team or individuals might be underperforming where that's reenacted. But I think certainly in this kind of dislocated world we live in right now, if you can't manage your own gap and understand that forecasting is a part of what you do, you will fall into the gap eventually. And if your kind of methodology is just to keep running forever, you'll run out of gas as well. It just doesn't happen. So I think the answer around this one is you've got to become financially able to plan what your business looks like. And if you don't plan for that, you'll end up with a very patchy result, be it you'll get 6 budgets of 12 or two quarters of 4 or whatever it might be. You'll see that with individuals. But once again, if you're lucky, you've got a manager who pulls you aside saying, hey, I see a thing about how you're operating here and you need this template. And it's a pretty simple spreadsheet, right? And you need to figure out how to work this thing, because you're going to keep falling in the gap otherwise, and it's going to cost you, which means it's going to cost me, and there's only one way that ends.
Mate, I think that's a really good point, because to me, there are two schools. There is, the forecast is kind of this document that's filled out at a C, let's say a C minus level. It's sort of done begrudgingly. It's not done with a lot of thought. Or there you see the reps that really utilize the forecast and unearth the insights and actually formulate action plans off the back. And it's fundamentally a mindset thing, right? Everybody can actually forecast, but it's how you interpret and translate the data the forecast is telling you into what your plan is going to be to close that gap out. I think it's a really good call, and I like that. Mind the gap, or you'll fall in. It's
mind the gap.
The way to put it.
Hey, and let's be honest. I mean, is there a modern media sales team that doesn't have a revenue management system in place and doesn't have a forecasting tool in place? Be it, are you on Pipedrive? Are you on Salesforce? Whatever you're on, right? And if the business isn't giving you one, there are free versions out there you can open source for yourself. But I think the story we're trying to create today is be more professional about how you conduct your business. And if you think of it that way and you're not running a forecasting tool for your pipeline, well, good luck. If you think you're going to fly by your seat of your pants and do that for, year on year on year and make it through, you just won't.
No, I couldn't agree more. And look, I've been doing this a long time. I'm a sales director. I still probably have some gaps in my forecasting skill set that I need to work on. So it's a good call out for everybody. It takes constant focus and time and energy to make sure that your forecasting is accurate and is usable. It was just an interesting segue. You're talking about your business, and I am jumping ahead to the next commandment, but I thought this sort of dovetailed in. The next commandment around honor thy clients and your own business equally. So that one, I think the sentiment there is obviously it's not just about hitting your budget. It's about understanding the drivers of your own business and the reason why certain pricing decisions are being made and why certain resources are allocated and whatnot. That one to me feels like just an interesting one to unpack around balancing what it is the clients want and obviously competing for revenue, but also doing it in a way and attracting an advertiser that comes into an organization and doesn't cause sort of internal chaos or havoc.
Yeah, well, I think, and direct sales probably over time might have, a bad rep on this. Now, in all of my time, and particularly in the years I did in consulting with sales teams, the single biggest point of concern that we would create when we made a recommendation for a change in a sales org was things like putting a minimum transaction size in place. We are no longer accepting contracts and IOs under a dollar value of X. There would be a protest march down the corridors up to the boardroom, to the sales director's office going, what are they saying? Do they not understand? And the underlying point for anybody who's making any sort of strategic review around a sales org is getting the best outcome for the client and the best outcome for the business. So the first point I'd like to make about this is about win-win. People think that customer centricity is I have to do whatever's right for the customer. Well, even if you're having 100% focus on that, not a more kind of 50-50, the business has to win for the customer to win and vice versa. Because it's not economic for the business to keep doing some things forever, even though the customer might think it's a good thing. Ultimately, the business can't sustain it anyway. The amount of time and effort it goes in setting up a campaign for $10,000 is the same as for $100,000 if we can kind of, a standard execution, right? It's the same. But if the client's going to spend $100,000, they're pretty much guaranteed of getting some sort of result, I would think. Whereas clients spending $10,000, you tell me how many of them come back twice. So there's a lot of resistance when you start talking to sales teams around why we have to actually get some equality in the business outcome and say, you know what, it's bonkers for us to take their 10 grand. We're going to clog up our machine trying to deliver it for them, and it won't work anyway. You're not going to get the second booking. So stop doing it. So I think the moral inside this one is more about you've got to think through the win-win. And what you will see is a lot of aggrieved salespeople who have been taking $5,000 and $10,000 bookings. And a lot of them build a book around that, just trawling through fives and tens. And it's largely driven by inbound inquiry, I'll be honest with you. It's not, I don't see it as something that prospecting tends to dig up. occasionally really sharp prospectors, back to point one, will find somebody. But gee, if you're going to go through all the time and effort of setting up prospecting through EDMs, LinkedIn, whatever outreach you're using, and then you end up with a $5,000 or $10,000 sale, I think it's a race to the bottom for that individual. And it gets back to that whole strategic selling point around, your time's really precious. So what are you going to do with it?
It's a really good call out around, customer centricity or misguided customer centricity, because I have to admit, even I've been guilty of this in the past, of going like, hang on, we're a customer centric organization. For us to win in the marketplace, we really need to accommodate our clients' needs, and we want to remove as much friction or roadblocks or drag in kind of getting these deals converted as possible. And I think, your reframe there of going, you do have to think about it in the larger context around, well, what does this actually mean for the client, right? Like, I think that was a really good point that we might hang on, because I think we might visit it a bit later, but really interesting perspective there, Tony. Here's one, number 5. Thou shalt not covet other salespeople's success. Now, obviously, I'm taking this from the actual 10 Commandments, so some of these I've had to get a bit liberal with, but that one actually I think is an interesting one to kind of just hear your unfiltered perspective on.
Yeah, well, look, this is a classic corridor, chat with the sales manager's favorite gets all the leads. That person always gets looked after on price. That person always seems to get what they want on inventory. It is a classic, right? And maybe it plays back a little bit to that honor thy internal departments, right? That if you treat everyone like a client, you tend to get a better run. Yeah, so look, my feeling on it and what I would coach into teams is that when we all win, we all win. And if you can coach and embed an abundance mentality and culture into a group whereby they all lift each other up each time good things happen, rather than the old days when, someone made a sale and they're ringing the bell like they've, change the world somehow, and everyone's raising their eyebrow and going, oh God, not them again, and all of that. They're clear cultural cues inside sales organizations. So I offer up this, we all win when we all win is my view of it now. And I also don't think that things are as cutthroat as they were, then once again, 10 years, let alone 20 years. I mean, there was a time where you would start in media sales, and I know we've both worked in radio, but I'm pretty sure in my first job was in direct sales in radio. And on my first day, I think my boss said to me, would you like A to K or L to Z? And I kind of looked at him going, what are you talking about? Mate, the yellow pages. Do you want A to K or do you want L to Z? Where do you want to start? And I'm like, holy moly, this is going to be tough, right? Now, if you're operating in a bullpit like that, right? If you're operating in one of those kind of boiler room environments, my first advice would be leave, because it's not good for you and you should get out because you're learning the wrong things. But I really don't see that around the grounds anymore. I think the level of sophistication that's in place now with organisations, and you've got to remember there was a time where there were no people and culture departments and there were no HR departments. So where we are right now and the cultural kind of focus that leadership teams bring, engagement scores, just as a for instance, managers don't survive unless they've got engaged teams. And engaged teams do not function under the guise of I'm here to get you and I want to beat you. It's just not the way they work. That's not to say there's not competition and people don't want to get budget, but I think what they crave more is reward and recognition than they do trying to get ahead of their peers these days. Positive change.
I think so too. I think, reflecting on my early days, we were the boiler room style. There was a lot of intercompetitiveness in the team. I always tell this story of, there was a group of about 5 or 6 of us in particular who were very much on that sort of type A personality spectrum. And I can remember, we'd drive our car into the car park in the morning and you'd be like, oh, who's here before me? I'm going to get here a bit earlier tomorrow. And it got to the point where we were literally getting into the office at like 7 a.m. and couldn't call clients for 2 hours. It was ridiculous.
No, for sure.
So,
we all lived through that. Like I was there in the 90s, mate, when people would get into 6 and tell you that you'd rock in at 7 and they'd say, where have you been? I've been here at 6. I turned the lights on. I was here before the
Yeah.
breakfast team were here. And I'm like, well, great, mate. What are we going to do for 2 hours until the clients turn up, right? What are we all going to be doing? So the other thing about that is that there are certain sectors where there's not enough for everyone to eat that bring out the
Yeah.
worst in us. So let's say this: digital for 20 years has had pretty much compounding growth, and that compounding growth's largely been double-digit growth. So nearly everybody that's grown up in digital ad sales has not had to grow up in that boiler room. There's been enough for everybody. But if you grew up in direct TV sales, outdoor sales, and radio sales, they were boiler rooms probably as recent as 10, 15 years ago. Now, I haven't been inside a radio sales meeting for a while, nor an outdoor one, but I would love to think that they are more in line with what I now see in the digital marketplace, around the level of sophistication, team building, and it's measured, right? It's measured in churn, it's measured in engagement scores, as I said, and managers can't have it running rife. Because even if you're a leader of a team and your results are good, but your engagement scores are not, it's going to be a problem for you as the leader. It will come to you. And if you're the one driving that division between team members, you will not have longevity anymore.
No. I mean, it's funny, like the single biggest concern as a sales director, at least from my perspective, and I've been doing it near on 10 years now, is disharmony in the team, right? Like that's the number one thing that has to be fixed before you can actually focus on happy customers or revenue outcomes. You cannot have your team having intercompetitiveness or discontent or any sort of cultural issues, because that's not a high-performing business if that's an issue, and nothing else is going to fly on top of it. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think the next one was interesting, mate, and we might just briefly sort of skip over this one because I think we've spoken about it, but you shall not steal pause the client's budget if it is too small, which I think you summarized beautifully before around taking a $5,000 or a $10,000 booking, and pretty much knowing that it's not going to generate any sort of an outcome for the client. So I reckon we've said enough on that one. The next one I think is one I'd like to hear your perspective on. Number 7, don't take your competitor's name in vain.
Yeah, right. Well, this is the 2020s playbook. This is a rewrite because everybody who's been around for a long time has grown up with besmirching the competitor's name or their products, right? Let's try and reframe this. What does elbows out look like without it being too overt and too over the top? Because you also can't be someone who just goes with the flow, and when the client says, I'm doing what you don't want me to do, and they keep telling you that, you can't just rock back in your chair going, oh, that's a wonderful decision. That's fantastic, right? so that's not going to work either. And if you've got legitimacy around, I've got products that will help you meet your needs and they're priced right and whatever, then, and there's not a personality mix up or whatever it is, then we describe it now as having our elbows out a little bit. And there are times when elbows need to be out more than other times when elbows don't need to be out at all. But how do you pick the tonality around what that looks like? So, that's being proud and loud on the stats and data that supports your market positioning. I would describe that as an elbow out position, right? And nearly everybody who would be listening to this has got a slide that goes into their decks explaining why the company they're representing today is number one at something they want to be claiming number one in. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the trade marketing job, and that's our positioning job. So, and there's nothing wrong with putting that at the front of your deck every time you meet a client, and I'm sure we do. And we call it creds, don't we? Here are our creds. When really it's just it's an elbows out sort of brag sheet around why we're number one. It very rarely converts a sale, right? But it does give you legitimacy around the second meeting with the client to say, oh, okay, yeah, I get this. This person's actually selling something that seems to align with my audience and I should be there. I think the days of the tribal wars in radio and outdoor are long gone, and television for that matter. Maybe in television they're still there. I'm not close enough to the sector, but I feel like the enemy is not within, the enemy is without. The enemy is global tech platforms. The enemy, if you're in broadcast, is probably SVOD stealing eyeballs, and maybe Netflix are going to start selling ads. So I think the days of looking intra category for a fight, I think they're done. I don't think it happens. As I said, I am all about, widening your width and putting your elbow up to make sure everybody knows where I sit in the market and why my products are a good fit for you and your business. I don't have a problem with that at all. And I think it is part of what the business is paying you to do, is to pitch, position, and sell that message. That is your job. And then the other part of it is that everybody is more concerned around how their lunch is being cut by, I don't want to cliche it, but, Google or Facebook.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, mate. Like, to me, particularly when you're in a tight market, I have no doubt any media organization where market share is still a real driver probably are a lot more inclined to make these kind of competitor comparisons in market, and maybe to sell again, to actually genuinely sell against another media provider. I think the thing for me would be, when is it sort of putting forward a proposition, and when is it helping you sell, versus when is it petty or unnecessary? And everybody's going to know where the line kind of sits. It's kind of going, is this actually helping me make a case, or am I just taking a bit of a cheap shot here? So
I don't think it goes on a lot, Jamie. I think that's the other point these days. But here's my final thought on this is, just walk a mile in the client's shoes. Because you are the second, third, fourth, or fifth person from your sector who is sitting in front of them telling them they're number one. The reality, of course, is the client by this stage has got their bullshit antenna right up going, yeah, right? So there's not a lot of gain in it anyway. It doesn't really work for them, because they're going, why are they all telling me the same thing? They're all lying to me?
Yeah.
There's probably a smarter way to come at it that I think the most adaptive sales professionals have already figured out, which is to stop talking about yourself and stop talking about competitors and talk about what the client's problem or opportunity is, and they'll win the money.
Absolutely, mate. And I think, to that point, when you are trying to differentiate, genuinely don't say why you're the best or why you're number one. Just say why you are different, right? Like, and have it be meaningful difference that the client will actually see value in. So, yeah, that was an interesting perspective there, mate. I like how you've been able to kind of talk about how things are changing over time. And I dare say anyone who is really hyper-competitor focused at the moment probably does have some blinders on for a much larger marketplace that we're all competing in, with some big structural forces at play. So really good call. Okay, number 8. We're burning through these, Tony. Thou shalt not murder thy own rate card.
Number one heard phrase for losing business to a competitor. The thing I've heard most over my years in direct sales teams, and the reason we've lost business, is because the competitor has dropped their pants.
Yep.
And I just think, there's this hilarious thing that goes on around the mystery of pricing. And I'm just not sure whether you feel it like I've felt it over the years, but it's really rarely about price. It is generally about the value equation. Let's be honest. I don't know how many teams are out there currently trading off rate card discounts that could be 70 or 80% off the published price. Do you reckon that still happens?
Yeah, I'm sure it does, but I don't think it is the causal factor for people winning or losing business.
It is not.
If that makes sense.
No, it's not, because once again, walk a mile in the customer's shoes. The customer's seen the same proposal from 5 different vendors or 3 different vendors. Everyone's operating 70, 80% discount. So I think the fixation on price and lowering price, it's also uneconomic for your business, which gets back to, point number 4 around, the win-win piece. It's got to work for your business economically in terms of it being able to get a result for your client. You've got to be able to keep doing business with them. So rate cards are, I think, currently a thing that sales teams maybe hide behind in terms of value creation. It could be that there's a lack of commercial acumen in some of the groups because they're so fixated on the point of sale and closing a deal that they miss the pre-sale value creation bit that then leads to the only thing we're talking about is price. Now, and I will say that the owner of any business is going to be sharper on price and value than potentially an agency buyer that's trying to deal with 30 proposals and get back to a client and, cut and paste slides for a presentation tomorrow morning. Okay. It is different. And a lot of the agency pricing deals are already cut up front. So it's not even about price. So the
Yeah.
direct sales teams are still at the forefront of feeling pricing tolerances and pricing loads. So first thing to know for you as a direct sales professional is, are we price makers or are we price takers? Can I set a price for the market because my ratings dictate that I'm so far ahead that it's I can write my own ticket, or am I in a scrap here and Survey 6 has shorted me nationally and I can't price that way anyway, so I've got to do a lot of work in the pre-sale around how I'm going to bring value to it. Because interestingly, if we do a radio example, both companies can provide a result for the client. Even with ratings reduced or ratings increased, there's still enough audiences floating around a radio network, regardless of the turbulence of ratings that affects pricing, for the client to work, which is why direct sales is the most resilient sales channel in any radio business's revenue, right? Like everybody who's listening to this who works in radio would understand that, the direct sales budget doesn't rise and fall as heavily with ratings as an agency sales teams does, because the money just moves around. Whereas direct sales, you can hold all that money. So I think we get too caught up on price at the point of sale, and we haven't spent enough time on value creation in the pre-sale process. And that point is, well, what are we going to bring to this that I'm going to be able to tell the client we're doing that's not just about a line item on a rate card? And there are so many things there.
Such a good point, mate, because I think you're absolutely right. Like, I've even posted about this on LinkedIn before, because the thing about saying that you're losing business to a competitor on price or they've dropped their pants is it makes the assumption, it's probably easy because you have no control over your competitor's pricing, right? So it's an easy excuse to kind of go back to somebody and go, we lost it because they did this. But the reality actually is it makes the assumption that you've done absolutely everything else completely perfectly and you've made no mistakes. You've built the perfect value proposition, you've priced it fairly, and if not for them dropping their discounts further, you would have been successful. And I think sometimes it's like you're just robbing yourself of an opportunity to learn there, and to really kind of go back and go, what did I probably miss here? What increased the probability of me losing this? With direct sales, it's a good point you made there too. Like, I was actually in an event last night and I'm out of radio, but caught up with some old colleagues and they were making the point of, I really want to throw everything at this to make sure the client gets a great outcome and has a great campaign. And I think that's the tension that's going to exist with direct salespeople is, well, I really want to make sure this client gets a great result. So I want to make this budget work as hard as it can for them, whilst I'm also simultaneously selling the value of what this radio station or this radio network or podcast, etc., can bring. So there is a healthy balance there that people need to try and strike as well.
There's got to be. And as I said, I firmly believe that we'll all live and die on price occasionally, because increasingly the media organisations have become more fluent in deal management. There was a time where deals were done between the sales rep and their direct boss, and the boss would go, yeah, drop it another 10%, see if that works. And then if that didn't work and we still look like losing, the boss would go to their boss and say, we're about to lose this. What do you want to do? Now, that's all been taken out of that forum now. And there are trading teams, there are head of trading roles, there are deal management forums. There's a high level of scrutiny around floor pricing and yield outcomes. So that day is gone. So if you can't win it at the deal management forum and you've chucked everything you can in the pre-sale, and by that I mean, have we done everything to align our senior managers with their senior managers? Is there a single touch point in this deal? Because that makes it really, really fragile. If we've got multiple touch points on their side and our side, makes it a lot stickier and easier for us to get what we want to do, right? So my focus is on pre-sale first, but you've got to be sharp on deal management. I'm not saying price doesn't matter, because that's a furphy and I wouldn't sell that. But if you're working in a business with a sharp deal management structure, then you've got two bites of the cherry. You've got your pre-sale set up, and then you've got when the deal's going down at point of sale. And we don't win them all. Let's be honest, we don't win them all.
Yeah, great point, mate. Number 9. This one took a little bit of massaging. Thou shalt not make thyself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above. And I've put in brackets here, basically just don't be a wanker, don't be arrogant. Don't be somebody that people don't like being around when you start to get some success if you do.
Now, listen, I don't know how many people or what types of people listen to this, but we may not have a huge amount of self-awareness on this podcast, in the listenership. I don't know, Jamie. I don't know. But let's also agree that the era of self-awareness is a recently new addition to the sales repertoire. And as coaching and the feedback culture's grown, where definitely, Gen Z and Gen Y cohorts are more open to feedback, that I think the risk of this point is deteriorating rapidly with the younger cohort that's moving through, and that the ones that are left in there that may have this wanker attribute, once again, in my coaching time, I would suggest to you that they are probably not like that on both sides of their lives. It's unlikely they go home like that. But when they're client facing or in the office, they have built this as a coping mechanism. And that's the thing that I'll say to anybody who's in direct sales listening to this podcast, is that effectively you're going to have to ride more bumps in this job. And your ability to figure out what your coping mechanisms are that lead to your resilience will be one of the secrets to success and longevity in the role, because it's got more turbulence. It's less structured. There are more wild cards that happen, and you need to learn how to ride those bumps. So I think the don't be a wanker thing, in my experience, is largely a wall of protection that seasoned people have put up. And then, of course, when newer people come in, they see that, and it's teached into the newer breed. Now, that was the problem that went on, right? It was we're all wearing navy blue pinstripe suits made of armored steel. And it doesn't matter what you say or do to me, mate, because I don't care. Now, that was kind of what it felt like for a very, very long time in direct sales. And what happened was half the sales team would blow up every year. Churn in sales teams in direct sales not that long ago would be between 35 and 50%. I don't believe it's that anymore, because once again, we're more sophisticated and businesses have understood that it's not economic. You can't be onboarding half your sales team every 12 months. You can't make budget. It's not possible. So I'd like to be optimistic and think that the attribute you're describing is now scarcer. I wouldn't say it's extinct. I wouldn't be that bold. But I would say it's scarcer, and certainly the newer generations who are moving through the profession do not seem to arrive with a willingness to grow into that. And I don't think they're surrounded by the volume of people they used to be to learn it. It's no longer seen as I'm all right, don't worry about me. Yeah, whatever. Let's go outside for a cigarette. It's like, I don't think it's real anymore, mate, would be my thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more discussion. And once again, for people who are listening to this at the first half of their career, just find good managers. Worry less about what sector. Find someone who will coach you and give you feedback and set you up with your own set of coping and resilience mechanisms to be able to ride out the bumps, because, mate, it's still bumpy. There's no pretense about this. And some days it feels like, you're rocking up to a street fight. I fully get that. Fully.
Totally agree. I mean, what a beautifully articulated, very insightful thought that you just had for something that I literally thought we might just skip over and just go, just don't be a dickhead. But I think you've nailed that, mate. And I completely agree. It's the first 2 years of my career in direct media sales were still the single hardest time in my professional life. It's a big driver of why I started this podcast, because it's a really lonely job. It's incredibly emotionally draining. It's incredibly stressful. It can be humiliating at times. It can be, the highs are high, but the lows are very low. And you're absolutely correct, right? Like people, particularly people who have to deal with things like rejection, like getting phones hanged up, on them. That can really wear on people, and it can really start to deplete people emotionally. So the dovetail here is our final commandment, which is kind of a nice one to wrap this up on, actually, which is thou shalt keep their personal time holy, which obviously means you need to make sure you don't burn yourself out.
I don't think back in the day that we were famous for balance. Can we go with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we were at all. I think it was very gung ho, and if you wanted to be successful, you had to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning, turning the lights on, right? And that became 7 o'clock. That became 8 o'clock. Then sales meetings died every morning. That became 9 o'clock, and now we all work from home. So now the problem is that we're all on screens for 10, 11 hours a day. And in theory, we've got a different type of burnout going on. And the thing is, I do a lot of work with teams around selling styles and the spectrum of styles, and and sometimes when you think about direct sales, we tend to pigeonhole that as we're making a movie and we call central casting, and we say send us a salesperson, and they send us the Alec Baldwin guy from Glengarry, or they send us the car guy, or the whatever it might be, right? But the reality is that is some of us. In the middle of the spectrum is just these really great relationship people who are brilliant. And then at the other end of the spectrum are these very analytical, thoughtful, problem-solving salespeople. And I always coach that everyone's equal. Everyone can write $1 million a month or $1 million a quarter or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter where you sit on that spectrum, right? So, but how you manage yourself is peculiar. Now, what gets you through the turbulence is going to be different where you are on the spectrum. So sales teams that are run, in a very homogenized way, we all do things this way, this is the way it has to be, are not fit for purpose in 2022. It's just not the way of the world, right? So I'm always interested in understanding the style that a salesperson leans into to get the job done. And then I'm interested in helping them understand that style, and obviously the correlation style, which is the customer's style, right? Because that's the biggest one, is getting great alignment between the sales professional and the customer, because that's the magic sweet spot, right? So how you manage teams is only as good as how you manage and understand the individuals within the teams, and the move to personalization around coaching and feedback away from group forums where you all get locked in. I don't know if anyone on the call would remember it, but if the sales meeting was at 8 o'clock and you arrived at 8:01, the door was locked and you had to sit outside waiting to explain yourself to the boss, right? Crazy days. Now it's not like that. So what's going on is we're running a highly personalized franchise model where, depending on how you do what you do so well, your manager and the business needs to support that. And that comes with the feedback around, hey, too much giddy up, not enough whoa. I've just noticed you got 6 weeks annual leave owing. I want you to take 3 weeks starting next week, right?
Yeah.
Because we see that a lot. We see the burnout, and particularly the burnout happens at the end of a run. Made budget for 2 years in a row, 7 quarters, whatever it is. But when the moment comes when you're not, everything rolls up to an 11 out of 10 effort, and you blow up and burn out. And that's when people spin out. So it's actually a bit of a bipartisan thing, whereby you've got to be working with that great manager who helps you understand why you're great at it, and helps you manage your time, your effort, and your emotion throughout the journey. Because you're right, man. It's the most visible part of the commercial business, is just the scoreboard, right? The sales scoreboard. Who's top, who's bottom. And I don't think there's anything much more, upsetting to people other than sitting on the bottom of that thing for week after week or month after month. So how you manage yourself through that is probably only as good as how your manager helps you do it. But, effectively, I always kind of, with direct salespeople, you don't want to tell them they're running their own franchise, because I think that's kind of an 80s kind of look at it, because you're part of a bigger organization, you're part of a bigger mechanism that's all in it together. But gee, in the cold of night, when there's nothing to do except think about what you're going to do tomorrow to get yourself out of the hole you might be in, that's pretty daunting stuff that I don't think a lot of other roles bring with it. I think it's fairly unique to this craft. So, managing your personal time is more about how you manage yourself throughout the kind of ups and downs of this journey.
It's funny, mate, because I can't remember who I heard say it, but I thought they really nailed this point that, burnout isn't about working too hard necessarily. Like, I can work hard all day, right? But if it's got to be that I'm engaged in the task and I have an element of control. And burnout typically comes from people who work at a pace and intensity that's quite high, but also feel like they aren't in control. So my big advice to a lot of people, particularly in the first year, is really just focus on the habits, right? Like, if you want to get to a goal, usually what you will find is that it's the habits that you have to put in place daily, hourly, weekly, monthly, whatever they may be. Just focus on those and just hold your nerve during the tough revenue times, and you will typically find that consistent approach is what gets most people to a level where they're really performing quite well in this profession. It's quite remarkable that the top performers, they don't really do anything too amazing. They just do the ordinary stuff kind of really well. Just consistently do the boring stuff, right?
Having obviously observed a lot of that and then done, some research and surveying around what the top performers do, the ones with longevity, they have a brilliant playbook.
Yeah.
They have a playbook about what to do when. Now, that's either been passed on to them or they've learned by surviving the trough. So it is an interesting kind of thing to observe, but the consultants will tell you it's about cadence and operating rhythm at the organisational level. At the personal level, it's about understanding your playbook. The things I have to do every day, every week, every month, every quarter. If I'm going to be successful, I've got to tick all the boxes in the playbook. If I haven't done them, there's risk, and that's the reality.
Yeah. No, 100% it is. Funny. It's interesting you say that, Tony. It's like we set this up because we've just implemented a new playbook into my team, which the team are all very excited to adopt and implement.
Well done to you, mate. I'm sure it will go well.
Thank you, sir. Hey, look, we better stop talking or we're going to be at risk of getting to the top of the comedy charts for podcasting as well. But, mate, I really enjoyed this chat. I think... we could probably unpack a lot more here around the discipline of direct sales. So this is probably a little bit of a tightly packaged kind of way to get into it. Mate, I wanted to, just before you go, I'd love just to kind of hear whatever you can share. Obviously, there's a bit that's commercially sensitive, but what does the next 6 months look like for you and the team at Mamamia? What are some of the things you guys are working on and thinking about at the moment?
Well, we've just obviously come out of strategy and budget planning for FY23, and look, we've spent a lot of time on diversification and building out our product set over the last 3.5 years. So our and here's why everyone at Mamamia is probably more excited than they've ever been in the 15-year history of the company. We have 3 main media assets that we're taking to market. Our publishing business, we have a very vibrant podcast business that's, we would like to say, market leading in many ways, and we also have a social business that we call Squad that sells influencer campaigns as a media line item, but also as a content agency. Now, all 3 of our products are in growth mode, and none of them are in single-digit growth mode. So our publishing business is in double-digit growth. Our podcast business, as I'm sure everybody understands, is in super high growth, and so is influencer. So that's why everybody at Mamamia is jumping out of their skin about the year ahead.
Very exciting, mate, and 3 very complementary products to actually sell together too.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, don't want to brag, but kind of by strategic design, right? There's, the founder of the business had a model 4 years ago that they wanted to enact. So, hey, like all good strategies, they're only as good as execution. There's probably a podcast in that for someone around sales strategy and how to actually make things come to life. Because I think if I had to say, Mamamia's got, great products and great people, but it's getting really good at executing on that.
I think that is absolutely the differentiator in high performance, mate. It's anyone can put it on the page, but actually translating it into an actionable plan and implementing it. That's the fun, but the hard part. So, Tony, look, I really wish you well, mate. I'm going to put your LinkedIn in the show notes. As we have had with other guests, every now and again, you'll have the odd listener pop up and just want to connect and ask you further questions. But, mate, really, really enjoyed the chat and really appreciate you spending your Friday evening with me, getting into the weeds, talking direct media sales. It's very much appreciated.
Absolute pleasure, mate. I will see you soon.